All right, good morning. So my name is Dan Friedman. I'm a data center technical solutions architect that works for the Americas Partner Organization at Cisco. I support partners in the Pacific Northwest. And the purpose of this presentation is to introduce the product Intersight. This is a presentation that would make sense for both business and technical audiences. So let's go ahead and get started. For our agenda, first we're going to talk about why Intersight. In other words, why do we need Intersight? What are the business drivers? Also, we're going to talk about what is Intersight, what are its components, what are its capabilities. Then we'll cover a little bit about Intersight Architecture, and then I will point you at some resources that you can use for further information. So first off, why Intersight? And the answer is complexity. And I've thrown up a bunch of information here on this slide. By the way, this presentation doesn't include a lot of slides, but each slide is fairly content rich and provides a lot of discussion points. So basically, Intersight helps customers manage multiple layers of operational complexity and tooling. So if you look at locations, we've got data centers, we've got co-locations, campus networks, branch networks, edge locations, small office, home office, IoT devices, and of course, cloud service providers and the resources we have deployed in their respective regions. We've got different cloud service providers or providers, period. We have our on-premises locations or our self-hosted resources, and then we have resources that are now hosted by cloud service providers like AWS, Azure, GCP, and Oracle. We've got infrastructure. We have compute infrastructure or server infrastructure. We have storage. We have network. We have a bunch of different transit networks. So we have our LAN, our local area network, our wide area network, which is now software-defined WAN. A lot of the time we have VPN, we have internet, a bunch of different types of connectivity that we need to manage. We also have different hypervisors. We've got VMware, Hyper-V, KVM being the most popular. Operating systems, Windows, Linux, Mac OS, applications that are hosted on our on-premise infrastructure, that are hosted in the cloud, or that are even SaaS-based offerings. So, and then we have users, right? Our users are anywhere, they're everywhere, they are operational 24/7, 365. If you've got a large global scalable application with kind of consumers all over the globe, that would be the goal. And all of this added together means it's a very complex environment, right? There's a lot going on here, and we need something to help us manage this complexity. So that is why we need Intersight. Now, what is Intersight? And that's a pretty loaded question. And like I said, I'm not going to present a lot of slides, so there's quite a bit baked into the information on the right side of this slide, and we're going to cover that. So, what is Intersight? It's a loaded question because the vision for Intersight is pretty broad, and it has evolved to consist of several solution components. So we're just going to kind of take this step by step and talk through the information on the right. So first, Intersight is a SaaS-based cloud operations platform. What does that mean? Let's break that statement down in reverse. So first, the word platform. A platform is a single central user interface which provides the grounds or basis for further action. Okay, so the platform may have some functionality of its own, but the idea, the grounds or basis for further action means that there's some subcomponents. We're going to talk through those. Next, cloud operations. Its capabilities stretch across private and public cloud boundaries. And SaaS-based means there's really nothing for you to install or update or secure because this is all done for you. So it's pretty easy to get started. Now, to help illustrate where Intersight belongs in Cisco's broader portfolio of products, we need to mention that Intersight is part of Cisco's FSO initiative. And FSO stands for Full Stack Observability. FSO isn't a product. It is a concept, and it's an idea that involves providing three things: visibility, insights, and action across your technology stack. This is about collecting and processing lots of data via AI or ML to provide meaningful business visibility and insights that are beyond human scale, meaning there's so much data, there's so much information that you'd have to have a really large team in order to analyze and produce the insights that this product can handle for you. And then once we have visibility and insights from the data, then we want to be able to offer recommendations for action, which can be either executed manually or via automation. So today, FSO is handled across 3 different domains. The first one being your infrastructure, which is really where Intersight has most of its play. You also have your networks, which is where Thousand Eyes has most of its play. And you also have your applications, and so that's where App Dynamic comes in. And those 3 products fold up under the umbrella of the FSO, or Full Stack Observability Initiative. Okay, so what next? Intersight offers features such as connected TAC, which means proactive case opening for Cisco equipment that is managed by the platform, along with automated data upload for diagnostics, analysis, faster responses via chat, phone, email, and WebEx. So basically, instead of having to open up a TAC case manually and upload your evidence of the problem or other files that were requested by TAC, since basically this is a SaaS-hosted platform that's hosted by Cisco, TAC can basically gain access to the information that they need to support troubleshooting or any problems that arise in the systems that you're managing. It can also support automated RMA. So, for example, it can detect a bad DIM in the compute infrastructure that you're managing, create a service record, basically approve the RMA, and then notify the customer that a replacement part has already been shipped. It can handle things like hardware compatibility list and recommending firmware updates. So basically, these are compatibility checks for your compute infrastructure, for your servers, your firmware, the processors, adapters, operating system, and drivers. And it's important to understand that this analysis is context sensitive, right? So that means that the recommendations that you're getting are specific to the hardware and software that you are running, and they're not just generic. Another good example of something like that are advisories, right? Normally you might get a field notice that says that, such and such an issue impacts this hardware, and your first question is, well, do I even have that hardware in my environment? And if so, where is it so that I can go fix it? And so all of this information that's provided is contextual management and recommendations and even forecasting based on exactly what you have installed and running in your environment. All right, so I said that Intersight was a single central user interface which provides the grounds or basis for further action. So what are the solution components that are a part of the Intersight platform? And the answer is there's several, and I'm going to explain each one at a time in brief format, right? This is intended to be introductory and not a deep dive into any one of these services. So the first service is what I refer to as IIS, and that's not your Internet Information Server, I think is what it was called. Runs on Windows. It's a web server. That's not what this is. This stands for Intersight Infrastructure Services. And really, Intersight found its genesis as an updated management system for on-premises Cisco compute infrastructure. So it allows for management, or this component allows for management of HyperFlex and UCS C-Series, B-Series, the more recently released X-Series hardware, and consolidates management functionalities from UCS Manager and UCS Central. It is the Cisco compute infrastructure to which all of the features like connected TAC and automated RMA, HCL and firmware, advisories, recommendations, and forecasting are applied. Okay, so when you see IIS or hear Intersight Infrastructure Services, think along the lines of UCS Manager. Okay, and we're going to cover a little bit more of that a little later in this presentation. The next component is IWE, which stands for Intersight Workload Engine. And this component is Cisco's new modified KVM hypervisor aimed at saving customers licensing costs and unifying VM, container, and serverless functionality. So a single hypervisor, ideally, to host your virtual workloads, your container-based workloads, and your serverless functions. The next component is IVS, which is Intersight Virtualization Service. And this component can be thought of as a single interface for executing common operations against your virtual workloads, regardless of their location or which hypervisor they run on. So if you're running virtual machines on ESX, or you're running virtual machines on Hyper-V, or you're running virtual machines in one or multiple public cloud service provider environments, then you have a single interface where you can start and stop and restart virtual machines. There may be other operations available, maybe cloning, etc. But the idea is, regardless of where those workloads are located or which hypervisor they're running on, you can perform those common operations from a single point of administration. The next component is Intersight Kubernetes Service. And basically this component allows for the deployment and management of Kubernetes clusters. And those clusters can either be deployed on machines that are running on-prem or on machines that are running in the cloud. If you're familiar with something like Rancher, that product can do similar things, but we are trying to wrap that functionality in under the Intersight umbrella so that you can have all of this functionality in one product, one throat choke. Okay, the next component is IWO or IWO, and this stands for Intersight Workload Optimizer. And some of you out there may be familiar with CWOM, or Cisco Workload Optimizer, and essentially that product is its own standalone product, but all of the functionality has been wrapped into Intersight Workload Optimizer and made available via the SaaS offering with appropriate licensing. So this component collects data from the virtual compute layer of your on-prem or public cloud infrastructure, and it provides visibility, insights, and actions recommendations as previously mentioned. So in order of priority, Intersight Workload Optimizer is focused on making sure that your workloads are optimized for one, performance, right? And that is the top priority, because the goal is to deliver a great end user application experience by ensuring that workloads are not under provisioned. Number two on the priority list is compliance. So in a typical virtual environment, there are rules that dictate, where workloads should run. So compliance is about proper placement and distribution of your workload across your public cloud service providers, the regions that those providers offer, the hosts running in those regions or on-prem, while in adherence to defined business policies, etc. So, maybe you have an application that has redundant components, and you want to make sure that those components don't run on the same host, because if the host fails, you lose both of those redundant components. So you may have some business rules or logic programmed into the platforms that you run these virtual workloads on that make sure that those two virtual machines don't ever run on the same host. Okay, so IWO can work with those business compliance rules and give you a rating of how compliant you are. And then the third priority is cost. And really what we're talking about here is cost efficiency by ensuring that workloads are not over-provisioned. So performance is making sure that workloads are not under-provisioned, and cost or cost efficiency is about making sure that workloads are not over-provisioned, and therefore that hosts are not underutilized, right? If you over-provision virtual machines running on a host, you take resources away from the host that cannot be given to other virtual workloads. And if that VM is not consuming the resources that you've pulled away from the host, then that means that overall the host becomes underutilized. So you're spending money for resources that you're not consuming. So the goal obviously is to right size all of your workloads to make sure that they have enough resource to be performant, but not so much resource that you're actually wasting money and preventing good utilization of the hosts and resources that are available in your data centers. So the more targets that you add to Intersight Workload Optimizer, the better visibility that component has and the better insights and actions it can recommend or execute on your behalf. Okay, the next component is ICO, or Intersight Cloud Orchestrator. This component provides orchestration capabilities by running workflow automations that are built in a low-code user interface by leveraging drag and drop tasks from a built-in task library, or optionally, you can create your own library items. So that's a long way of saying, in a typical day, or when you're trying to roll out a new, a new application, there's a bunch of tasks that need to happen, and you can string those tasks together, one in front of the other, in order of dependency to automate all of that work that needs to get done. Workflows can be partially or fully rolled back if problems are encountered, and the ICO component resembles functionality that was previously delivered by UCS Director, but these two things are separate products. So there is no lift and shift of UCS Director policy or migration of that policy into Intersight Cloud Orchestrator, but the UI and the drag and drop assembly of tasks into workflows and all of that does have a similar look and feel. Okay, the last component is IST, which stands for Intersight Service for HashiCorp Terraform. And this component provides tight integration with Terraform Cloud, which is a service that's meant for enterprise Terraform customers. Terraform Cloud allows multi-user access, role-based access control, a remote execution environment for your Terraform scripts, and simple backup and restore capabilities, among other capabilities that most enterprises are going to find useful. The only thing that's technically needed to run Terraform is to download a binary to your laptop and then create your scripts, manifests, whatever you want, your Terraform files on your local laptop. But obviously that holds everything local to your laptop and doesn't provide an easy mechanism for sharing. Another potential problem with that is if your laptop is damaged or files are lost or it's stolen, then you lose all of the state files that Terraform keeps locally. And that could be detrimental from an operations perspective because you're kind of having to start over and you have no way to deprovision the resources based on the current state of what has been deployed through Terraform. So Terraform uses a provider plugin model, and that allows you to target the provisioning of infrastructure across different systems or environments, including on-prem and in the public cloud. So, the goal, not just of the Terraform component, but of Intersight as a whole, is to be able to touch the systems that reside on-premise and that reside in the public cloud in order to provide meaningful operational value. Okay. Now, you might have noticed in this slide the word microservices. Why is that up there next to the solution components header? And that's because the primary concept behind microservices is to take a large monolithic application and break it up into its smaller component parts. This allows each individual function of the application to be isolated from the other functions of the application. And what that does is several things. It eases troubleshooting efforts because now you can just focus on troubleshooting this one function, irrespective of the other isolated functions. It allows easier bug fixes and future enhancements of that one component without impacting any of the other components of the application. The other thing that microservices do is they allow you to sort of pick from an inventory of available services that you might need when you're building your application. So as a result, you can assemble those services together to form an application with all of the functions that you need, but with none of the functions that you don't need. So similarly, while while the ultimate vision for Intersight is very broad, you don't have to consume all of these Intersight capabilities today. Intersight can meet you where you are on your hybrid cloud operations journey by leveraging only the functionalities that you need today. Plus, you can grow into the product by leveraging and adopting additional functionality when it's appropriate. Now, they say a picture is worth 1,000 words, and so this diagram is really meant to summarize everything that we just talked about on the previous slide. So, down here at the bottom, we can see that Intersight helps you with your equipment regardless of location. You've got edge, co-locations, branches, data centers, and cloud service providers. And running in those locations, you may have physical compute infrastructure from Cisco. That's what's being represented down here at the bottom. So you've got UCS and HyperFlex, converged infrastructure, virtual machines, containers, and serverless functions. And applications these days are distributed. They used to be centrally housed in a data center where everyone would access them, whether coming in via the internet or coming in over a private WAN connection. But now, because performance is so important, applications are distributed to be closer to the users. And that means that applications no longer just live in the data center, they also live in these other locations. Okay, and the form factors of those applications, some of them are virtual machines, some of them are more modern application architecture, containers, or serverless, where it's just an API call to execute a specific task or function. That would be serverless. Okay, so at the bottom layer down here under infrastructure, we have IIS, or Intersight Infrastructure Services. And again, that's all meant to help you manage your Cisco physical infrastructure regardless of location. Now, under the workloads tier, we have the Intersight Workload Engine, which is basically your hypervisor. Intersight Virtualization Service, which allows you to do common operational tasks across your virtual workloads, and Intersight Kubernetes Service, which allows you to deploy and manage Kubernetes clusters both in your on-prem data center and in your public cloud providers. And then at the cloud layer, we have Intersight Workload Optimizer, which helps you to optimize performance, compliance, and cost of your virtual workloads regardless of their location. We have Intersight Cloud Orchestrator, which allows you to perform automation and orchestration of a series of tasks arranged into workflows against your infrastructure. And then we have Intersight Service for Terraform, which allows you to provision resources either on-prem or in your cloud service provider. So as we can see up here at the top, Intersight stretches across both private cloud and public cloud operations capabilities. And over on the right, we have a summary of all of that. Full stack, multi-tenant cloud platform. So when you log into Intersight, you can create different organizations, and that is the essence of multi-tenancy inside of Intersight, and it allows you to define who has access to which resources. So resources are assigned to an organization, and then users and permissions are assigned to that same organization. That's what allows those users to manage those resources. So you can divide your infrastructure up across different organizations, and that gives you multi-tenant capability. Obviously, we can manage bare metal with our UCS and HyperFlex and converged infrastructure. We can manage our virtual workloads regardless of location. We can manage our Kubernetes clusters regardless of location. And there's an asterisk next to function as a service. That is a future capability that will be coming to the Intersight Workload Engine. Again, a replacement hypervisor that helps customers save cost and consolidate VMs, containers, and serverless capabilities all on one hypervisor. Then we have the hybrid cloud automation and orchestration, which again is through Intersight Cloud Orchestrator. Hybrid cloud observability and optimization is really referring to Intersight Workload Optimizer. And all of this is delivered as a software as a service. Now, there are other deployment options, and we're going to cover those coming up here when we talk about Intersight Architecture. Okay, now this over here on the right is one of the best examples that I've seen it tries to explain how, like, this is great, right? We have Intersight, it has all these solution components and all these capabilities. How does this all really work together? And can we provide an example that shows how this really functions well together? So, so this is the best example I've seen of that. Potentially a DevOps user wants to deploy an application on a Kubernetes cluster. They want the web tier to live in their public cloud provider for elastic scaling, but they want the database to live in the on-premises compute for data sovereignty and cost reasons, maybe even performance reasons. So the DevOps user creates a Terraform plan to create Kubernetes clusters, and then the DevOps user applies that plan using the Intersight Cloud Orchestrator Terraform executor, which then calls Intersight service for Terraform. And IST then calls Intersight Kubernetes service to create two clusters, where one of those clusters lives in the public cloud and one lives in the private cloud. Then Intersight Kubernetes service will call Intersight virtualization service to create two sets of VMs. Some of those VMs are in the on-prem deployment. Some of them are in the public cloud deployment. And then Intersight Kubernetes service will create two K8s clusters and install K8s into those clusters. Then again, we go back to ICO. ICO can then call Ansible to deploy applications on top of those clusters. And then finally, Intersight Workload Optimizer, now that everything has been provisioned and is up and running, Intersight Workload Optimizer can now monitor those applications in VM or container format and make recommendations for performance and cost optimization. So with a single Terraform plan, a developer can deploy and monitor a multi-cloud app, right? And that shows how the multiple components or solution components of Intersight can cooperate and work together to achieve some pretty powerful functionality. And I think, again, right, you may not have a need for each of these components today, but you can kind of see what it is you would be able to build towards with all of this functionality wrapped in under a single product. All right, so let's talk a little bit about Intersight Architecture. What does that look like? First, you have several deployment options, and these are highlighted up at the top part of the slide. The first deployment option is software as a service, or SaaS. And this is intended for all customers that are comfortable with consuming SaaS-based platforms. It is a fully provider-managed platform. That provider is Cisco, so there's nothing for you to install or upgrade or secure. This is all done for you by Cisco. And the point of administration is to log in at intersight.com, which provides the Intersight UI. So you would simply log in and consume the platform by enabling licensing for the components that you need, claiming your hardware and software components. We're going to talk a little bit more about that. And then configure and tune the components and operate your environment. In this mode, each hardware or software component that you claim from any given location establishes its own outbound SSL connection to intersight.com, either directly via the internet or via outbound web proxy. In this mode, all data that's gathered from the managed systems is sent to intersight.com. It's all encrypted in motion and at rest, and it never includes any business or application data. Okay, so you don't need to worry about HIPAA or PCI compliance or GLBA or anything like that, because we're not collecting application or business specific data. We're collecting metadata from the systems that we are managing themselves. So you, with this mode, you get all of the benefits of connected TAC and automated RMA, hardware compliance list, firmware recommendations, advisories, and field notices, etc. The second deployment option is what we call CVA, which stands for Connected Virtual Appliance. And this is really intended for customers who might not be comfortable consuming a SaaS-based platform because of data transfer or storage concerns. Now, again, we're not storing or transferring any business or application data, but still, right? Some customers are more sensitive than others to the data transfer or storage concerns. So this is a customer-managed platform. The partner or customer is responsible for installing and upgrading and securing the CVA VM. And the point of administration is to log into the CVA appliance, which then provides the Intersight UI. It'll look and feel the same as if you were logging into intersight.com, but you're actually logging into a local virtual machine that provides that user interface. So again, you would simply log in and consume the platform by enabling licensing for the components that you need, claiming your hardware and software components, and then configuring and tuning those components to operate your environment. So in this mode, only the CVA appliance component is claimed, and so only it establishes an outbound SSL connection to intersight.com. Again, either directly through the internet or via outbound web proxy. So in this mode, all of the data that's gathered from the managed systems, all that metadata that I mentioned, is sent to the CVA appliance locally, right? That too is all encrypted in motion and at rest, and it never includes any business or application data. So the data doesn't really change. Now, all other devices connect internally to the CVA appliance. So you would log into the CVA appliance, the UI, make your claims to your hardware and software components. Those would all speak locally to the CVA. And since the CVA gets claimed from intersight.com, you still get all of the benefits of the SaaS platform, things like connected TAC, automated RMA, HCL and firmware and advisories, etc. But you don't get the benefits of having a fully provider managed platform, because again, this is a customer managed platform. It's a virtual machine that lives in your data center. Okay, the third option is what we call PVA, or private virtual appliance, and this is intended for customers who have strict compliance controls in a completely air-gapped environment, which prevent them from deploying in one of the other two modes because this location cannot or does not have internet access. So again, this is a customer managed platform. The partner or customer is responsible for installing and upgrading and securing that VM. The single point of administration is still to log into the PVA appliance, which provides the Intersight UI, and you simply log in and consume the platform by enabling licensing for the components you need, claiming your hardware and software, configuring and tuning the components, and operating your environment. In this mode, the PVA appliance is not claimed from intersight.com. Why? Because we said there's no such internet-based communications that exist from this type of location, right? Which is why we're deploying the PVA appliance in the first place. So in this mode, all data gathered from the managed systems is sent to the PVA appliance. So again, no business or application data, just metadata from the systems we're managing. All of that data is encrypted in motion and at rest, and it never includes any business or app data. Okay. All other devices connect internally to the PVA appliance. So you can still run Intersight from a UI perspective, from a systems management perspective, but since there's no connection back to intersight.com, you no longer get the benefits of connected TAC, automated RMA, hardware compliance list, firmware recommendations, advisories, etc. And you also don't get the benefits of having a fully provider managed platform. So across these three different deployment options, you kind of have the easiest, the hardest, and the middle ground, which would be CVA. Okay, now the fourth bullet point you see here, AA, stands for the Assist Appliance, and this isn't really a deployment mode so much as it is some additional functionality. So the Assist Appliance is a reverse proxy that is intended for customers who wish to use it in conjunction with the SaaS-based offering to manage third-party hardware and software components on premises. This is a customer-managed virtual appliance, so the partner or customer is responsible for installing, upgrading, and securing it. And the best practice is to deploy one Assist appliance per location. So one per data center or co-location or branch or cloud service provider, etc. And the reason for that is because the Assist appliance itself needs to be able to resolve DNS, route to, and have security policy access to the third-party hardware and software components that you wish to manage via Intersight. So examples of third-party hardware and software components include VMware vCenter, or storage controllers for Pure, NetApp, Hitachi, and I think EMC is in there, or it's on its way. So when you claim a third-party hardware or software component from within Intersight, it's going to ask you which Assist appliance to use as a reverse proxy in trying to communicate with the third-party component. Then you can provide the needed URL and login credentials for the third-party component. So if you had, say, 2 sites and you wanted to attach to vCenter in Site 1, then you would deploy an Assist appliance to Site 1, and when claiming vCenter in Site 1, you would point at the Assist appliance in Site 1, then provide the URL and login credentials for vCenter in Site 1. So that's how Intersight understands, okay, I want to talk to this vCenter, but I need to talk to that vCenter through the Assist appliance that's located in the same site as that vCenter. Okay, so in terms of coming back to the slide, data transfer and storage, this was already kind of described along with the deployment options, but there's a few bullet points here just to kind of reiterate. Everything is encrypted at rest and in motion. Where the data or how much data is moved around and where it's stored depends on your deployment method. But regardless of the deployment method, there's never any application or business data sent as part of those transactions. Okay, now with regards to management communications, all remotely managed systems either come with a device connector, which we're going to talk a little bit more about coming up here, that is preloaded into your equipment, or you can upgrade the firmware on your existing devices to include the device connector as part of the firmware upgrade. The device connector establishes an outbound connection to Intersight.com, but essentially that connection is unauthenticated until the device initiating the connection is claimed by Intersight. So just because you think of it like a TCP three-way handshake, right? Just because computer 1 tries to initiate a conversation with computer 2 doesn't mean that computer 2 is going to do anything with that, right? Especially if you're not authenticated. So once the device is claimed by Intersight.com and authenticated, at that point, a bidirectional communications tunnel is established, which can then be leveraged by all of the licensed components under Intersight to communicate and add services to the equipment across all of your locations. So for example, if Intersight Workload Optimizer licenses are enabled within the Intersight user interface at Intersight.com, then Intersight Workload Optimizer can still analyze workload back in your on-premises data center. So for example, you can claim an on-premises instance of vCenter via a local Assist appliance, and the claim process includes a per device ID and a 10-minute rotating claim code, which basically provides multi-factor authentication. So these data points are collected from the device to be managed and then entered into the Intersight UI, and that's basically how the claim process works. So in the slide we see outbound SSL via internet direct proxy, and what that means is there's never any inbound session initiation that comes from Intersight.com. That means you don't need to poke any holes in your firewall. It's all outbound. So either your security policy allows outbound to internet for your devices to communicate directly to Intersight.com, or you can use an outbound proxy to maybe wrap some more control around that. And then finally, things that you can claim include hardware or software. So for example, hardware might be something like a UCS Manager running on Fabric interconnects and managing your B series UCS servers. And an example of a software component would be claiming a vCenter or something of that nature. Okay. All right. So moving on. Again, pictures are worth 1,000 words. So Just like before, this picture sort of summarizes what we were just talking about. In this slide, you'll see the 3 deployment options, and admittedly, this is a somewhat simplified diagram, so I want to explain what it is you're looking at. The SaaS option would be more appropriately depicted by showing multiple arrows, each representing a different source hardware or software device or appliance on the right side, all pointing at the Intersight.com on the left. There are multiple connections here, and the sources can be located anywhere, right? So if you just look at all those different icons over on the right, over here, we can imagine each one of these is a separate, let's say, C-Series rack server, and each one of those would have its own independent connection back here. So this green arrow is summarizing many connections, okay? And they're all HTTPS, and all of those connections are initiated from the remote site towards Intersight.com. Okay, so the connected virtual appliance option would look similar, but just for the small arrow over here on the right, that arrow represents multiple source connections coming from the equipment over here on the right to the CVA appliance. Here, though, you have a single connection from the CVA back to Intersight.com on the left. And this is what allows you to take advantage of things like connected TAC and automated RMA, hardware compliance list, firmware recommendations, etc. Because you still have some form of connection from the CVA back to Intersight.com. Now, at the bottom, we've got the private virtual appliance option, and that would look the same for the small arrow. So here, right, multiple connections coming from your source equipment. Sorry, don't know why that keeps changing my slide. Over here to the private virtual appliance, but now we see that there is no connection back to Intersight.com on the left. And that's why you no longer get the benefits of, connected TAC and all of that. Okay, so this is just a simple visual representation of everything that we discussed in the previous slide. And the last thing that I'll point out here is you'll notice the word login in red for each deployment method, and that represents the point where you log into and perform administration for that type of deployment. So for the SaaS option, you log in at Intersight.com for all system administration, and you claim all of your devices in all of your locations. The CVA option, you log in at the CVA appliance on premise for all systems administration. You claim the CVA from Intersight.com in order to take advantage of some of those features, and you claim all other devices from the CVA. Okay, and then the PVA option, you log in at the PVA on-prem for all system administration, and you claim all other devices from the PVA. But there is no claim from Intersight.com to the PVA, because the point of this deployment type is that it's air-gapped, completely isolated, no internet connection, etc. Okay, so this slide talks about Intersight with UCS Management. So the only system type today that requires Intersight is UCS X series. But Intersight can actually manage more than just the X series. So we want to try and go through those concepts here. This diagram attempts to explain two things, but only one of them is really clearly depicted. So those two things are, one, operational management, right? Where does operational management occur? And you can think of operational management tasks as things like firmware upgrades and OS installs and system restarts and all of those things. Okay, and then the second thing is policy management. And we can think of policy management tasks as things like defining service profile functionality, things like pools and policies which get applied as a personality to the server. And so in the diagram, you can see the blue circles which say policy very clearly. You don't really see operational management. So we're going to talk about that as we go through this slide. So first, on the far left, you see the standalone servers over here. And these are your typical UCS C-Series rack mount servers. And as you're accustomed to, these are managed via an integrated management controller known as the SIMC. So with a firmware upgrade to your older equipment, you will obtain new functionality within the firmware that's known as the device connector, the DC, which is shown in dark blue in the diagram. That's this component right here. Okay. The DC is the software component on the server which allows it to be claimed by Intersight. This is the component that makes that outbound SSL call or connection to Intersight.com or to your CVA or PVA, depending on your deployment mode. You log into the server SIMC, you go to a specific menu in the administrative interface to find the device connector, and within that screen, you get two things, the device ID and the claim code. And you enter that information into Intersight.com or CVA or PVA, and then a connection is established from your claimed device to Intersight. The device now shows up in the Intersight interface, and for the C-Series servers, you can now perform operational tasks on the server from Intersight, and you can also perform policy management tasks for that same server from Intersight. So that's why you can see up above standalone server here, we show that policy is being administered from Cisco Intersight. Operations tasks are also happening from Intersight. Okay, so next in the middle here, we see blade servers, and these are your typical UCS B-Series blade servers, or what we refer to as a traditional UCS domain. So as you're accustomed to, these are managed by UCS Manager software up here that is running on top of the Fabric interconnects. So with a firmware upgrade, you will obtain new functionality, again, known as the device connector, shown in dark blue. Okay, here that device connector runs inside of the UCS Manager software instead of the SIMC software like it does on the standalone server. So again, the device connector is a software component on the server which allows it to be claimed by Intersight. In this case, it's not a server, it's the Fabric interconnects which manage multiple chassis and the servers included within those chassis. So you log into the UCS interface, you go to a specific menu in the administrative interface to find the device connector, you get the device ID and claim code, and then you enter that information just like you did for the rack servers into Intersight, and then a connection is established for your claimed device to Intersight. Given that this is B-Series, once that connection is established, it's going to take a little while, but Intersight is going to basically inventory everything that the Fabric interconnects are connected to, and that's how you come to be able to manage all your servers. So once you've made your claim, the device shows up in Intersight interface, and for the B-Series servers, you can now perform all the operational tasks on the servers from Intersight, which is really happening up here, and that's the part, like I said, that's not shown, but your policy is still running down here on UCS Manager. So, your policy management takes place via UCSM, but your operational tasks take place via Intersight. So you sort of have like a split management model here, and we're going to talk about why that is in just a minute. So finally on the right, over here, these are your newer UCS X series blade servers, or what we refer to as a modernized UCS domain. Now, a modernized UCS domain still connects X series blade server chassis to Fabric interconnects, so we're showing the Fabric interconnects here. But those Fabric interconnects no longer run UCS Manager software like we saw over here for the B series. Instead, these Fabric interconnects run a new software called the Intersight Managed Mode Device Console, which we're showing here in red, the IMM, Intersight Managed Mode Device Console. And essentially, that is a very thin layer of software. And so when you provision the Fabric interconnects from scratch, you wire them up as you would even a traditional UCS domain. And then you power them on and you run through somewhat of a typical setup script. In that setup script, though, you can now choose whether to run these Fabric interconnects as a traditional UCS domain with UCSM software or a modernized UCS domain with the IMM device console software. since we're trying to show how this is different from B-Series blade server management, imagine during that setup script that you select to run a modernized UCS domain with the IMM device console. So you can then log into the device console just as you would UCS Manager, but you only see a few options of things that you can do. So you don't see pools and policies and templates and profiles as you did inside of UCS Manager. But one thing that you do see, which is new functionality, is known as the device connector, again shown in dark blue in the diagram. So the device connector is, again, a software component on the device which allows it to be claimed by Intersight. So in this case, you would log into the device console, go to the specific menu in the administrative interface to find the device connector, then you get the device ID and claim code, and you enter that information into intersight.com, and a connection is established from your claim device to Intersight. That device now shows up in the Intersight interface. So just like I said with the B series, since these are fabric interconnects, there's going to be an inventory process there to pick up any rack servers or blade servers that are being managed by those fabric interconnects. Now you can perform all operational tasks as well as policy management tasks for the servers within Intersight. Okay, so C series and X series, you manage the operational as well as the policy from Intersight. B series, you manage the operational tasks from Intersight, but you still manage policy from UCS Manager. So, this always begs a question, right? Why not migrate the policy management functionality of the B series into Intersight so that we can maintain the same operational and policy management paradigms across all of the equipment? And the answer to that is that even though these two systems are functionally similar, right? We see them as, they're both running fabric interconnects and they both have chassis and blade servers within them that we're trying to manage. It looks similar from an overall consumption perspective, but under the hood, the model used to build each of these systems are different. So in short, the underlying system models are not equivalent, and therefore the policies built on the old model are not directly transferable or migratable to the new model. So for example, not all policy types that you might be familiar with in your B series system, things like BIOS and boot policies, are being migrated to the X series. Only the most used policies will be implemented in X series. It's another way of saying that, there's never going to be 100% feature parity between the two systems. So therefore, a direct migration of policies across those systems is not possible. Now, to assist with this, though, a tool called the Intersight Managed Mode Transition Tool has been released to help you plan manual policy migration, and so that you can try to understand where a policy may not be reproducible on the destination system, causing a loss of functionality that might pose an issue to your customers. So, this as a Cisco partner is a service that you can provide and a tool that you can leverage to provide it to help your customers eventually migrate away from B series onto X series, where all operational and policy tasks are managed centrally from Intersight. Okay, so we're coming up to the end of the presentation here. I wanted to give you some resources that you can use. So the first bullet point here, intersight.com. You can create an account at intersight.com to start managing your equipment today. The base license is free, so to get started, you really need nothing but an account and target systems that you wish to manage. The next thing I want to point you at is there are several sections of information available at intersight.com/help. There's a getting started section. I recommend that you read all of that. It provides some of the same background information as was presented in this presentation, but it also provides information about hardware and software compatibility and licensing. And there's another section called Resources, which provides documentation for each of the subcomponents of the Intersight solution. So it's a really great resource for you to take a look at. And then finally, there's dCloud. So you can view some demonstrations that are available at dCloud. Each one of these, I can pass out this slide deck after the presentation. Each one of these is a clickable link. So if you click on that dCloud link, it'll take you to Intersight demonstration for, I think it's Intersight version 2, something like that. There are many demonstrations available on dCloud for Intersight that demonstrate, for example, Intersight integration with UCSX or Intersight integration with Intersight Workload Optimizer. But the one that I'm linking here, it just provides the basics. So, to wrap this all up, just know that Cisco is investing very heavily in Intersight to make it a one-stop shop for all of your infrastructure, workload, and cloud needs. Again, at the infrastructure layer, we've got compute infrastructure management for UCS C, B, and X series standalone and blade servers. At the workload layer, we've got a single replacement hypervisor that's capable of running VMs, containers, and in the future, serverless functions. Single interface for operational tasks against all your virtual workloads, regardless of whether those workloads run atop a Cisco hardware on-prem or in a public cloud service provider. The ability to deploy and manage Kubernetes clusters to support your container-based workloads, again, regardless of whether those workloads run atop Cisco hardware on-prem or in a public cloud service provider. And then at the cloud layer, the ability to provision your infrastructure, the ability to automate and orchestrate the setup of software on top of your provisioned infrastructure, and then finally, the ability to optimize your workloads for cost, compliance, and performance. That's an awful lot of functionality wrapped in one product. All right, so with that, that wraps up our presentation. I want to thank you for watching. And if you have any questions, feel free to follow up with me. Again, my name is Dan Friedman. I'm a data center TSA. Thanks for watching.